Hello there, I'm Richard, and this is my portfolio that I took with me for my interview for the BA Hons Photography degree with the University of the Creative Arts. I've divided my portfolio into 7 sections, and these are photography that I want to make, building upon my own work and responding to feedback and critique, a whole assignment from start to finish, building upon the photography of others, photography for fun, pushing myself, and moving forward. We're going to start with photography that I want to make, and as somebody that has an interest in people, mental health, diversity and equality, I'm going to start with some photos I've been making as a larger body of work about eating disorders, body image and food. This particular photo is made of food. It's a conceptual piece of still life photography that explores the impact of having anorexia. The 1 in 5 refers to a percentage of people with anorexia that are likely to die from that condition, which is the highest morbidity of all psychiatric disorders. Room for improvement. I made this photo before I started Foundations in Photography, and it's really aware to me that I didn't take enough photos, and I cropped the top of the word anorexia without realising, and that I shot this on top of the carpet with a piece of wrapping paper, and I need to rework this on a solid background so that the scales do not then disturb the background, which in my opinion ruins what could be a high quality photo. This piece is called Sick of Bulimia, and this photo was the original one that I made last year, again before starting on Foundations in Photography with the Open College of the Arts. For exercise 3.3 in Foundations in Photography, we were asked to review certain photographers' work and then to make a series of photography that worked as a sequence. And after reviewing Keith Arnatt's Self-Burial, I developed this idea of turning an original photo, which is this one that I took a year ago relating to bulimia. I realised I could turn this into a sequence that highlights the urgency around the compulsion to eat, to go out and buy food and to purge, to make oneself sick. And predominantly for me the theme is, as well as that urgency, is around humiliation and shame. I see this as being a conceptual piece of work, and the sequence runs more like a clock, starting with the trainers and then going around the edge of the image. So the sequence is actually bound by time. It's a progressive journey from the thought of going out to get food and all of the way round to making yourself sick. I decided to use the mid-tone grey as a background because after using the white I felt that the colours became the emphasis rather than the emotion that I wanted to portray. However, after submitting this on my student blog and asking for feedback, it was suggested to me that I try a white background and that I also try this photo, the memorial that's in front of the co-op where food can be purchased, to try that as the centre of the photo because it's symbolic of death. And again, there is a very, very real risk of death for people with bulimia. And again, it fits into those 1 in 5 people with an eating disorder will die from their condition. So Here is the first rework series with the white background. I did try it out as was suggested by my peers on the course, but I'm really not happy with it because then the colour does take away from the emotions in my opinion. I don't have the version that I tried with the second image being in the centre, but it really disturbed the layout of the grid by having that as the central photo, and it just made it look scrappy, so I returned to this, which although it was my original image, following the feedback I've kept this because I've tried out what people have said, and I actually prefer this. Building upon my own work, feedback and critique. This photo book was something that I produced for the first assignment of my current course. And I'm not going to go into the assignment because for me the feedback here is more important for showing what I want to show. So for the book I created it with the original photo being on the left of the image and the text on the right hand side. My tutor pointed out to me that with the right hand side of the book being the flat side of the book once it's in somebody's hand, then the photo needs to be on the right hand side so that that becomes more important than the text. She also suggested to me to change the text font and the text size. And this was my first attempt at a photo book and I wasn't familiar with the software. I can see exactly what she was saying, and this is something that I will show how I've built upon this shortly. At the same time, my tutor was also aware that I've been photographing homeless people for a project that I was doing on homelessness, and she suggested that I look up the photography of Anthony Luvera, who his series Residents, people from the homeless community in Belfast, where he supported them to take self-portraits rather than take the photos himself. And she also suggested that I look up Brandon Stanton, an American photographer, and his series Humans of New York, which he developed into a photo book, and within that he included interviews that he made with the people that he had photographed. Now for my homelessness project, because I had already started that, it wasn't possible for me at that point to include long text because I'd spoken to people, and in the book I just got short quotes from people to go along with their photo, and it wasn't possible to go back and interview these people to get an interview. However, I have ensured that the photo is on the right hand side of the page, and the short quote underneath is in a more professional font and also much smaller, so just as evidence that I've responded to critique and feedback. But I wanted to really push the boundaries with what my tutor had said about working with others to make their own photography and include in their speech. I write photo essays for the Sociological Mail, and I wanted to create a photo essay that's about lived experience with autism, rather than just a medical, statistical piece of information that anybody could produce just from reading mental health manuals. So for this series, I decided that I wasn't going to make the photos at all, and I asked each of the contributors, my co-authors, to take their own photo, and along with that to write just a brief paragraph or two about their experience of living with autism and what that means to them. I then edited the photo. The photos are completely original. The only editing was so that I could include the text directly underneath the photos. So with this, it's again been built upon the feedback from my tutor, from looking at the work of Brandon Stanton and Anthony Livera, and I've created a really positive photo book with the autistic community, whereas I as a photographer do not have to make the photos. I wrote the essay myself through doing research around people's lived experience with autism. My essays are always referenced, so I reference validated work, and the references are found at the back of the essay. I did consider whether to put the essay on the left hand side of the page and write that out in the same way that I had done for blog publishing with the Sociological Mail, where the photos were scattered within the text. It just didn't look right on the book, but I'm very, very pleased that through collaborating with people in the autistic community, we've co-authored a book between us. And again, evidence of my response to critique and feedback and the work from other photographers to produce my ideas. Assignment 2 was called Painting with Light, and the aim of this piece of work was to create a portrait in which light had been used as a means of painting onto a subject in a dark background, but to bring out their features. Now, I don't spend very much time with people at all, so I was aware that the only opportunity that I was going to have was a Christmas holiday with my friends Nick and Lee. Nick is white and Lee is black, and because of that I felt it was really important for me to explore how light and white balance affect skin tone, particularly in relation to people with black and dark skin. Because I've seen some awful photography where people's skin colour has been absolutely ruined just by not getting the white balance right. So my preparatory photography was taken with my mobile phone through watching TV series such as Strictly Come Dancing, X Factor and Acapella. So the first 3 photos were taken as an exploration of how white balance affects skin, and this photo is the closest to the gentleman's skin colour, and as you can see from the top 2, they dramatically distort his colour and provide a false representation of him as an individual. I also explored different coloured lighting, and although I've only included these 5 photos, I took hundreds of photos on my mobile phone, and also took photos of people's makeup, and this included things like the Grand Prix, the presenter Martin Brundle having foundation on him to stop glare from his skin, just to be filmed recording Grand Prix. And ultimately this is the photo that I wanted to base the assignment on. So I developed the idea from this of creating a very dramatic scene that included costume and props, where it would be as if it was going to be a marriage between the 2 operas, Phantom of the Opera and the Mikado. So I drew out a test sketch so that I could plan both the scene and the photography. So I have the couple in the foreground, the male prop is the phantom mask and the female prop is the umbrella. At the front we have 2 different coloured lights that I was going to use to highlight Lee and Nick's skin differently. And in the back there is backlighting, that I planned to create from shining a bright torch through a box that had different confetti shaped holes cut into it with coloured gels so that we could get a heart shape as if it was confetti as the backlighting. So it was going to be quite a complicated piece of photography that was in fitting with the theme of painting with light, but also at the same time was very dramatic and theatrical, and probably it would have been overproduced. It wasn't possible for me to do that. I had never been to Nick and Lee's before. I wasn't aware of the space that they had. And Lee was also working 10-hour days in the build up to Christmas, and I didn't want to have her be a model when she was exhausted after work. So I had to change my plans really quickly and decided that I was going to try the exercise with light sticks as a way of capturing movement around Nick and also to capture some of Nick's personality. So although I'm not going to go into details, there is a symbolic reference here to Nick's current life position with movement and also a desire for stillness. We were asked to fit the photos together as a series as if they were going to be on an exhibition wall. And after the selection process and getting down to 12 final photos, I then looked at how I would be able to present the image so that they were consistent. For the consistency, what I've done is arrange the photos so that the light leads from one photo into the next photo, so that there is flow through each of the two photos. I presented this to my tutor and she was really pleased with the consistency of the work, with all of the background being dark and Nick still being visible, but she suggested that I might like to also put together an introduction to the piece of work. So if it was going to be on an exhibition wall, there'd be a written introduction. And she also suggested that I could use this photo, which is the stronger one, that really captures the essence of what I was trying to with Nick and his current situation. And although I heard her feedback, what this comes down to me is an exploration of identity and a larger piece of work that I can now build upon. So my introduction wasn't written as the introduction in the way that my tutor suggested. I put it together as a poem. I dare you to define me. What do you see when you look at me? Am I the eye that you think you see? The stillness within and my activity, these are just circumstance. Do they make me me? Is it the hidden depths that I cannot see, or does the mask that I wear make the person you see? Can we define self with true certainty? I can only be sure that I am humanity. Dare you define yourself? A Hermit's Journey is a narrative that I've created using photos from one of my favourite walks, adding text so that it gives a contextualisation of how I experience part of my life. This series of work is building upon the work of other photographers. I initially was inspired by Ed Rusher's Every Building Upon the Sunset Strip, and also a photo video that I saw made by Jared Polin on YouTube, in which he had his camera on a tripod, and then every metre of his walk through town he would take a photo to create a stop motion video. And that was my plan for what has become a Hermit's Journey. I knew that it was going to snow one day, and I wanted to capture photographs of Whitby in the snow. And I was going to use that inspiration from Ed Rusher and Jared Polin. But when I got up in the morning, the snow was so heavy that I realised that I would damage my camera if I followed that original plan. I still took my camera out with me and went for a walk and took photos on my way, and begun to think about what I could do differently so that I could still complete the exercise in creating another sequence. Now, I've been following the blog of Judy Back, who is an OCA photography degree student, and assignment 5 for her digital image and culture. She created a fictional character called Florence Fountain and set up a narrative of Florence's family and upbringing. In the story, Florence inherits a box of photos that she used to play with in her childhood, and Judy creates a story based around these photos in which Florence is the narrator. Judy has used appropriated photos from pixels or photos that she's bought off eBay or found in shops and altered them, aged them, and then told part of a story about that particular family member and Florence's relationship with them. And it's been a really impressive piece of work for me to follow, and I've thoroughly enjoyed not just the final result, but watching Judy's progress as she's developed this narrative, and found that has been a real inspiration. And because of that, I realised whilst I was walking that I could create a narrative about my life using photography that I made upon my walk. Judy's blog can be found at tellingstoriesmyfamily.wordpress.com. I'd thoroughly recommend looking at that. The learning point for me is how to watch somebody else's photography and use that to create a new piece of work. I think it's really important to follow other photographers because I can only go so far with my own ideas, and gaining that input and inspiration from other people and either trying to emulate them or create a piece of work that has been inspired by them helps me to develop as a photographer, to improve my skills, and also to create context around the work that I'm producing. Photography for fun. I take my studies incredibly seriously, and I put a lot of effort into the coursework and assignments, and try coursework using different genres, different styles, trying to emulate the different photographers that we're asked to review as part of the course. So I put a lot of effort into producing the work that I do, and what keeps me fresh so that I can really enjoy and make the most out of studying is the personal photography that I do, that is photography for fun. And the things that I really enjoy are photographing birds and macro photography. So here are just a few examples of my work. The first one, we have a peregrine that is feeding, and the second photo is of a kestrel, not in flight but flapping its wings. It was taken as part of a hawk display, so I was able to spend a lot of time to take hundreds of photos, and that was a really enjoyable day out. On a recent holiday to Lindisfarne, there were loads of birds around for me to photo. The camera that I use is a Fuji S9900 for my birdwatching photography. It's a bridge camera with 50 times optical zoom, and it's very difficult for me to get quality photos with that camera, but I also can't afford to get an appropriate lens for birdwatching photography. But regardless of the quality of the photos that I take with that camera, I really enjoy spending time in nature, watching and photographing birds, and occasionally I get an image that I am particularly pleased with. I also absolutely adore macro photography. For me, this is mindfulness in action. It really slows me down, puts me in touch with nature and quietens my mind, and that's something that I particularly need. So I like to take photos of flowers and also of birds. So here are just a few examples of the macro photography, and as well as flowers, I didn't mean to say birds, I meant insects. Although this photo looks good from a distance, I don't have the right depth of field, and it's something that I'm working on and practicing, getting the depth of field that I want in macro photography. Is a challenge, but it's nice to have areas for further improvement and the fun of developing as a photographer. And again, this photo looks good from a distance, but when you look close up you can see that there is no clarity and definition with the centre of that photo. And as well as wanting to catch the drops of rain, I really wanted the centre of that photo in focus. So room for improvement and continued development. Pushing myself, and for me, I really struggle being around people. I have a lot of anxiety, and I find it very difficult to not just be around people but to actually talk to people, and I very rarely mix with people. Even with the friends that I've known for years, I find it much easier to communicate over the telephone than meet up face to face. So for the part of the coursework called Image the Portrait, I had to get involved with people, and as I don't meet with my friends, that meant I had to get into my local community and ask people if I could take their photo. And it was a really scary experience for me, and it started off with me just going up to people and asking if I could take their photo, explaining my studies, but not being able to enter into a conversation. However, this photo I did enter a conversation with this gent, and he was absolutely wonderful. We spoke for quite a while. He'd got a bubbly personality. I really enjoyed talking with him, and as a consequence this has turned out as a very good portrait that's captured his personality, and in pushing myself I've achieved a very good result that I'm pleased with. I love events photography because at events people expect to be photographed, and that makes it much easier for me to be around people. And because they expect to be photographed at events like Whitby's Goth Fest, there's no need to even go up to people and ask to take their portrait. So it's street photography, but where people do expect to be photographed. However, some events like Northern Pride in Newcastle last year, I set myself the goal of asking 10 people if I could take their portrait, and I received a lot of support from my peers in my online study so that I could actually face my anxiety and ask people. And I went well beyond asking 10 people and had a really wonderful experience at Northern Pride. This is one of my favourite photos, but I've also included it because it shows something that I've got wrong. Now, the portrait itself included the whole of this person's face. She was really engaging with me and with the camera and got some great photos of her. But when I've gone to print this using an online print service, I wasn't aware of their crop ratio guides when I sent this for printing. They were there on the screen, I just wasn't aware when I ordered this one, so consequently I've cut off the bottom of her face. And that's a shame, but at the same point it's part of my learning and development as a photographer, and I do feel it's really important to both push myself and learn from the mistakes that I make. Commitment and moving forward. This is a photo montage that I've produced on Photoshop that has around 480 photos of pieces of graffiti, street art and just scribbles that have been put on the wall. The thing that I love about this is the whole process of this developing, because it started with just seeing one piece of scribble on a wall, and it just set a question for me as to why would people want to write on the wall. So I decided that I was just going to take lots of photos of scribbles, of graffiti, of street art, and I wanted to do something with them, but I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And this began 14 months ago. So I just continued to take the photos, and the question then developed into doing some research onto the modern history of graffiti and considering what happens when you take away people's voice and stop them from being able to express themselves. And in my mind, being able to express yourself as part of a personal, local and political community is how we develop self-identity from those discussions that we're involved with, and that self-expression is a huge part of learning who we are as an individual. So from doing the research and being aware of how government policy over the years has excluded young people from political discourse, with a blanket statement that young people don't want to be involved in politics, with discriminatory policies that in the UK have recently put limits on young people being able to claim housing benefits so that they would have to live with their parents rather than become independent. The inequality of education funding, so communities that are in poverty receive less funding than schools from more affluent areas, and then of course there's the whole scheme of private education and the class dynamics between who is likely to go to university dependent upon their socio-economic background. So all of this discrimination against the younger generation, the introduction of tuition fees, which really hampers the opportunity for young people from deprived areas to go to university. This exclusion from the political and socio-economic community leaves some young people with needing to find a way to express themselves politically and personally so that they can be involved in the world. And through looking at the research, this is how graffiti developed from the 1970s from American ghetto communities, particularly immigrant communities, second and third generation, that have been abused and discriminated by the government and members of the public. So the research helped, but what tied this together for me was seeing a YouTube clip of a comedian called Nathan Caton, who was talking about his brother and his friends and how in their community they use the word standard regularly. And standard as a colloquialism means that it goes without saying. So if somebody asks a question, are you going down the pub tonight, the response would be standard, as a way of expressing themselves. And the title of this piece of work is When You Take Away My Voice. So the term standard really fit in with the working title that I had developed. And it just pulled everything together for me so that I could make a piece of work that was like graffiti and that involved just getting all of these photos together. The process in Photoshop was incredibly complicated because although this photo here is 70 centimeters on the long edge, the actual piece of work in Photoshop is 2 meters 40 by 1 meter 35, so it's a massive piece of work ready for exhibition. And the complicated part was the layers, being able to line up edges of different layers once I'd got the photos where I wanted them, and having to rearrange layers, having to warp different layers so that they fit together, and it was a very time intensive piece of work. And this is the kind of standard of work that I want to be producing as a photographer. I want to be able to explore sociological themes conceptually and take that as a way of moving forward so that the work becomes more artistic in its preparation and layout than what I would do with portrait or landscape photography, even from a sociological theme. I also have other ideas for moving forward, and those ideas include what I could do with installations. And I can't really go into the whole idea I have for an installation at the moment because it's formulating, and I like to allow ideas to formulate in their own time. But I have an idea that means that I could return the photo back to being a physical image, and then through using the whole of a gallery space to deconstruct that photograph, that it's moving back from the material image towards a digital image, and at the same time to create the physicality of that image one step at a time. So that side is then moving to a reconstruction of the photograph, so a multi-layered piece of work. And I'm aware that if I work in collaboration with others, then I can also bring sound and speech into that as well. So I have some ideas about the kind of work that I want to move forward with. And I'm really excited about my photographic journey. Photography has given me a reason to live. It's really helped with my mental health, and it's something that I thoroughly enjoy and look forward to exploring and developing in future. Have a good day.